He was supposed to hear his name early. Instead, he kept waiting and waiting. And by the time the moment finally came, everything had already changed. Because what happened to Shedeur Sanders on draft night wasn't just a surprise, it was a shock. A player expected to go in the first round, suddenly slipping all the way to the fifth. Cameras rolling, people watching, expectations collapsing in real time. But here, what makes this story different? Most players don't recover from a moment like that. The doubt gets louder, the pressure builds, and the narrative starts writing itself. But Shedeur didn't react the way people expected. He stayed calm. He stayed patient. And most importantly, he didn't let that moment define him. Now fast forward, and suddenly, the same player people questioned is right in the middle of a quarterback battle that might not even be a battle anymore. So the real question is, did that draft night fall hurt him? Or did it actually set everything up? And this is where everything started to go sideways. Because heading into that draft, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just another name on the board. He was expected to go early, expected to hear his name called in the first round, expected to be one of the quarterbacks teams would build around. That was the narrative. And for a while, it looked like it might happen exactly that way. The draft begins. Teams start making their picks. Names come off the board. And then, nothing. Round one comes and goes, no call. Now at this point, people are confused. Not panicking yet, but definitely asking questions. Because when a player with that kind of expectation doesn't get picked early, it immediately shifts the conversation. Did teams see something we did? Is there a concern nobody knew about? That's how fast the narrative starts to turn. Then comes round two. Still nothing. Now it's not confusion anymore. It's tension. Because this isn't supposed to happen. Not to someone with his profile, his background, his visibility. Round three passes. Then round four. And by this point, the situation has completely flipped. What started as a celebration has turned into a wait. A long, uncomfortable wait, with cameras still rolling. And that's the part people don't always talk about. Because this isn't happening in private. This is happening in front of everyone. Fans watching, analysts reacting, social media already forming opinions. Every second that passes without a call adds pressure, adds doubt. And for most players, that's where things start to break. Because once the expectations fall apart, it's hard to hold onto confidence the same way. But here, the key part. Shedeur didn't lose that confidence. Even as the rounds kept passing. Even as other quarterbacks were being selected ahead of him. He stayed composed. And that matters more than it looks. Because moments like this don't just test talent. They test mindset. And the way a player handles that kind of situation tells you a lot about what comes next. Because eventually, the call did come. But by then, the story had already changed. And what happened right before that moment? That's what made this situation even more unbelievable. And just when it felt like things couldn't get any worse, they did. Because right in the middle of all that waiting, the pressure, the cameras, the uncertainty, something happened that nobody saw coming. His phone rang. And for a split second, everything changed. Because that's the moment every player dreams about. That call. The one that tells you it's over. You made it. Your name is about to be announced. And in that moment, after hours of waiting, after watching round after round pass by, it finally felt like it was happening. But it was. Because according to what's been said around the situation, that call wasn't real. It was a prank. Think about that for a second. After everything he had already gone through that night, the fall, the uncertainty, the pressure, someone decided to turn that moment into a joke. And that's the kind of thing that can completely break a player. Because it's not just disappointment anymore. It's embarrassment. It's confusion. It's the realization that even your biggest moment isn't being taken seriously. Now imagine how easy it would have been to react, to get angry, to shut down, to let that moment define the entire night. Most people would. And honestly, it would have been understandable. But that's not what happened. Because instead of reacting emotionally, he stayed composed. He didn't crash out. He didn't let it spiral. He didn't let that moment take control. And that's what makes this part so important. Because it wasn't just about what happened. It was about how he handled it. Because in a situation designed to shake you, he stayed steady. And that tells you something. Something that doesn't show up on stat sheets or highlight reels. It tells you about his mindset. Because anyone can stay confident when things are going right. But when everything starts going wrong, that's when you find out who someone really is. And in that moment, he showed something most players never get tested on that early. Resilience. And that's the kind of trait that doesn't just help you survive moments like that. It sets you up for what comes next. Because after all of that, the story still wasn't over. Not even close. And this is the exact moment where everything could have gone one of two ways. Because after everything that happened, the fall, the waiting, the prank call, the reaction was what mattered most. And this is where Shedeur Sanders did something most people didn't expect. He didn't let it break him. No frustration on display. No public meltdown. No emotional reaction that people could clip, replay, and turn into headlines. He stayed locked in. And that changed everything. Because in today's world, moments like that don't just disappear. They get amplified. Every reaction gets analyzed. Every emotion gets judged. Every mistake gets turned into a narrative. And if he had reacted the wrong way, that would have been the story. Not his talent, not his potential, just that moment. But instead, he gave people nothing to use against him. And that's powerful, because now the focus shifted. Instead of people saying, he couldn't handle it, they started saying, wait, how is he staying this calm? That's how quickly perception changes. Because composure under pressure stands out more than anything else. Anyone can celebrate when things go right, but staying steady when everything goes wrong, that's rare. And that's what people started noticing. Because while the situation itself was chaotic, his response was. And that sends a message, whether he intended it to or not. A message to teams, a message to coaches, a message to everyone watching, that he's built differently. Because this wasn't just a test of talent, it was a test of mentality. And he passed it without saying a word. Now hear why that matters so much. Because in the NFL, especially at the quarterback position, mindset is everything. You're going to face pressure. You're going to face criticism. You're going to have moments where things don't go your way. And how you respond in those moments, that's what defines your career. So when teams look back at that night, they're not just seeing where he got drafted. They're seeing how he handled adversity at the highest level. And that kind of response doesn't just disappear. It sticks. It gets remembered. And over time, it starts to change how people view you. Which is exactly what happened here. Because after that night, the story wasn't just about the fall anymore. It was about the response. And that response, it set the tone for everything that came after. And if the draft night pressure wasn't enough, there was something else he's been dealing with long before that moment ever happened. A name. Because Shedeur Sanders isn't just any quarterback trying to make it in the league. He's the son of Dillon Sanders. And that comes with expectations most players never have to face. From the moment he stepped onto a football field, the comparison started. Is he as good as his dad? Can he live up to that legacy? Is he really that talented, or just benefiting from the name? That kind of pressure doesn't go away. It follows you. Every game, every throw, every decision. And the truth is, most players struggle under that kind of spotlight. Because it's not just about proving you belong. It's about proving you're not just there because of who you are. And that's a completely different challenge. Now add that to everything that happened on draft night. The fall, the doubt, the public reaction. And suddenly, the pressure isn't just internal anymore. It's everywhere. But here what makes this part important. Because instead of running from that pressure, he leaned into it. He didn't try to escape the comparisons. He didn't try to hide from the expectations. He built his own identity. Through his play, through his confidence, through the way he carries himself. And that's not easy to do when the spotlight is already that intense. Because every mistake gets magnified. Every success gets questioned. And every moment becomes part of a bigger narrative. But over time, something started to shift. Because people stopped talking about him as just Dillon's son. And started talking about him as a player in his own right. And that's a big step. Because it means the focus is finally moving away from where he came from. And toward what he's actually doing. Now, does that pressure completely disappear? No, it never does. But it changes. It becomes less about proving you belong, and more about proving how far you can go. And that's exactly where he is right now. Because after everything he's already faced, the expectations, the comparisons, the draft night fall, the next chapter isn't about proving people wrong anymore. It's about taking control of the opportunity in front of him. And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because now, the conversation isn't just about his past. It's about what's about to happen next. And this is where the conversation starts to shift from emotion to reality. Because once you move past the draft night story, past the adversity, past the narrative, you get to the one thing that actually decides everything. What's happening inside the building. And that's where names like Mary Kay Cabot come in. Because insiders don't deal in hype. They deal in what teams are actually thinking. What coaches are seeing. What decisions are being considered behind closed doors. And when she started speaking about Shedeur, the message was interesting. Not negative. Not overly positive. But honest. She described him as a gamer. And that word matters more than people think. Because in football, there's a difference between practice players and game players. Some guys look great in controlled environments, perfect conditions, scripted reps. But when the lights come on, they struggle. Then there are players like Shedeur, who might not always look perfect in practice. But when the pressure hits, they rise. That's what gamer means. Someone who performs when it actually counts. And that's a trait you can't teach. Now, at the same time, there were also questions. Was he ready last season? Was he rushed into action too early? And according to what's being said, Even the coaching staff might have felt like he needed more time, more reps, more experience, more development before being fully thrown into the spotlight. And that's fair, because stepping into the NFL as a young quarterback is never easy, especially without full preparation. But here the key part. Even in that situation, he still showed flashes, moments where you could see it. The potential, the composure, the ability to handle pressure in real game situations. And that's what sticks with coaches, because they're not just looking for perfection. They're looking for signs that a player can grow into something bigger. And when those signs show up in real games, they carry weight. Now combine that with everything else. The mindset we saw on draft night, the confidence he's maintained, the way he handles pressure. And suddenly, the conversation changes. Because now, it's not just about whether he's ready. It's about whether he's becoming the best option. And once that question starts being asked inside a team, everything else starts to shift. And this is where things stop being speculation and start looking like a pattern. Because if you pay close attention to what's happening around the Browns right now, there are small signals, not announcements, not headlines, just subtle moves that start to reveal the direction things are going. The first one, opportunity. Because in situations like this, coaches always say the same thing. It's an open competition. But behind the scenes, it rarely stays equal for long. Because reps begin to shift. Attention begins to shift. Trust begins to shift. And once that starts happening, you can usually tell who's pulling ahead. Now, according to what's being discussed, the Browns are making one thing very clear. The starting job will go to whoever gives them the best chance to win. Not the most experienced, not the biggest name, the best performer. And that sounds simple, but it actually changes everything, because it removes all the usual advantages. Now it's just about results. Now add this to the next signal. The number chain, going from 12 back to 2. On the surface, it looks like a branding move. But inside a team, that kind of change carries meaning. Because you don't build hype around a player. Change his identity back to what made him recognizable. Unless you're planning for him to be visible. And visibility usually means one thing. Opportunity. Real opportunity. Now here, where it gets even more interesting. There's a growing belief, whether officially confirmed or not, that this competition might not be as open as it sounds. Because when you line everything up, the mindset, the flashes in games, the insider comments, the subtle signals from the team, it all points in one direction. Momentum. And momentum matters more than anything in situations like this. Because once a player starts building it, it's hard to stop. Coaches lean into it. Teammates start believing in it. The organization starts moving with it. And before you know it, the decision feels obvious. Not because it was announced, but because it was already happening. And that's exactly what this feels like right now. Like something is already shifting, just not officially yet. Which leads to the biggest realization of all. This might not be a competition anymore. And this is where everything starts to feel different. Because on the surface, it's still being called a competition. Multiple quarterbacks. Open battle. Best man wins. That's the public version. But behind that, it doesn't always play out that way. Because in the NFL, competitions don't stay equal forever. At some point, a direction is chosen. Not officially, Not publicly, but internally. And once that happens, everything else starts aligning with that decision. Reps increase for one player. Play calling starts leaning a certain way. Coaches begin building around a specific skill set. And over time, it stops looking like a competition. It starts looking like preparation. Now, if you connect everything we've seen so far, the way Shedeur handled adversity, the flashes he showed in real games, the gamer label from insiders, the messaging from the team about performance over experience, it starts to feel like that internal shift might already be happening. Because this isn't just about who has the most experience. It's about who gives the team the best chance to win right now. And when that becomes the standard, everything changes. Because now, the advantage goes to the player who's trending upward. The one building momentum. The one showing growth. The one proving something every time he steps on the field. And right now, that momentum seems to be pointing in one direction. Now, to be clear, nothing has been officially decided. There's no announcement, no confirmed starter. But that's not how these situations usually unfold. They don't flip overnight with a headline. They build quietly until the answer becomes obvious to everyone watching. And that's the stage we're in right now, where the signs are there, but not everyone is ready to accept them yet. Because once people do accept it, the narrative changes instantly. From can he win the job to he already has it. And that's a completely different conversation. Which brings us to the final piece of this story. Because if this really is already decided, then everything that happened before wasn't a setback at all. And when you put everything together, the story starts to look completely different. Because what seemed like a setback at the time, the draft fall, the waiting, the doubt, might not have been a setback at all. It might have been the setup. Because that moment didn't break him. It revealed him. It showed how he handles pressure, how he responds when things don't go his way, how he carries himself when the spotlight turns negative. And that matters more than anything else. Because talent gets you noticed, but mindset keeps you in control. Now fast forward to where things are today. And suddenly, the same player people questioned is right in the middle of a situation where he might already be taking over. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, through work, through consistency, through moments that keep stacking up. And that's how real shifts happen. Not in one big moment, but in a series of small ones that all point in the same direction. Because once momentum builds, it doesn't ask for permission. It just keeps moving forward. And right now, that's exactly what this feels like. Momentum. Now here's the part that makes this story even more powerful. Because if he does become the starter, if he runs out there in 2026 as QB1, then everything that happened on draft night changes meaning. It's no longer a failure. It's motivation. It's the moment that pushed everything into motion. And that's something people won't forget. Because stories like this stick. The fall, the doubt, the response, and then the rise. Which leaves one final thought. If teams really passed on him back then, and he turns into what people are starting to believe he can be now, then that draft night won't be remembered for where he fell. It'll be remembered for who let him fall.